The morning sun reflected off the glass windows of the new city library, its clean lines and sustainable features making it the pride of downtown Baltimore. Cameron Hayes parked across the street, got out of his car, and slung a worn leather satchel over his shoulder. He wore a navy windbreaker, khakis with a trace of dust from a recent site visit, and a simple gray cap pulled low over his eyes. He crossed the street slowly, observing the building. Every inch of it had come from his mind, his sketches, his models, his calculations. It was more than concrete and glass. It was proof of talent, of vision, of years clawing for space in a field that rarely made room for people who looked like him. At the entrance, 2 security guards in matching polos stood chatting. One looked up as Cameron approached and immediately straightened. "Hey, hold on," he said, stepping forward. "This site isn't open to the public yet." Cameron paused. "I'm here for the final walkthrough. Name's Cameron Hayes." The guard didn't budge. He looked Cameron over, frowning. "You got ID?" "Sure." Cameron reached into his satchel, pulled out a folded badge holder and opened it. It had his photo, his license, and a card marked, "Lead Architect, City of Baltimore." The guard barely glanced at it. "Sorry," he said. "We've had people trying to sneak in all week. I need to confirm with the foreman. You can wait here." Cameron exhaled quietly, stepped back, and waited. Another guard, younger, looked over but didn't say anything, just shifted awkwardly and stared at the sidewalk. It would be 20 minutes before anyone called upstairs. And even then, no one asked Cameron what his title was. Not yet. The radio on the older guard's belt crackled. He turned away slightly to respond, then glanced back at Cameron. "He's coming down," the guard said. "Wait over there." Cameron nodded once and stepped aside, standing near the concrete planter by the entrance. He looked up at the overhang he'd designed to shade the entryway. Cast long, clean shadows now. He liked that part. 5 minutes later, the foreman came down the steps. Hard hat, clipboard, steel-toed boots. White guy, mid-50s, face weathered from years in the field. He looked straight past Cameron at first, then double-checked the name the guard had radioed in. "Cameron Hayes?" Cameron raised a hand. "That's me." The foreman's brows lifted, but not in recognition, more in surprise. Then his mouth twisted, almost amused. "You with the inspection crew?" "I'm the architect." There was a beat of silence. Not long, just enough to feel. The foreman's eyes narrowed. He looked Cameron up and down, clearly reassessing everything. "Huh," he said. "Didn't think you'd. Usually it's someone older, in a blazer or something." Cameron didn't flinch. "It's not a requirement." The foreman laughed once, awkwardly. "Right? Just caught me off guard. Anyway, the site's still hot in a couple zones. We've got painters finishing the east wall and the HVAC team on the roof. You sure you want to walk it today?" "I scheduled it," Cameron replied. "I'll stay out of the tradesman's way." The foreman didn't move. "Still might be better if you wait for the city folks. Councilwoman Lee and her staff think they're due in half an hour. You could join their group." Cameron kept his tone even. "I'm not here for the photo op. I'm here to inspect the architecture." Another pause. The security guard behind them shifted his weight again, suddenly interested in a speck on the pavement. The foreman scratched the back of his neck. "Yeah, well, all right. I'll take you up." He stepped aside and gestured to the stairwell. Cameron walked past him, silent, the city library rising above them. His work, his lines, his design. And yet, not once had anyone said, "Thank you." The stairwell still smelled of drywall dust and industrial paint. Cameron's footsteps echoed lightly as he followed the foreman up to the second floor. They passed a group of electricians crouched near an open panel, wires trailing like nerves across the floor. "Watch your step," the foreman called out over his shoulder. Cameron sidestepped a coil of cable and looked down the hall. Natural light spilled through the clerestory windows, his idea. It bathed the corridor in warmth even without fixtures installed. He paused. The ceiling detail. It was wrong. That corner beam, meant to be flush, jutted half an inch below the soffit. A clean design ruined by a lazy adjustment. He didn't say anything yet. They continued into the central reading room, still unfinished but grand in its openness. The high windows caught the morning light just right, hitting the floor at an angle Cameron had spent weeks calculating. 2 workers in overalls looked up as he entered. One of them leaned toward the other and said something under his breath. The other just nodded, both watching Cameron move through the space. The foreman noticed but didn't comment. "You planning to take notes?" he asked. Cameron finally spoke. "That ceiling beam in the south corridor is off-spec. It needs to be releveled. And these support columns, did the concrete mix change?" The foreman frowned. "Shouldn't have. Because they're not matching the samples we approved." The foreman's voice stiffened. "You sure?" "I'm sure." Cameron reached into his satchel and pulled out a small leather-bound notebook. He flipped it open, jotted down a few lines. When he looked up, the foreman was watching him differently now, less amused, more wary. "All right," the foreman said finally. "I'll check with the site supervisor. You want to keep walking?" Cameron nodded. "Let's go to the rooftop garden." That was the first thing the council asked about. As they moved toward the elevator, one of the workers near the scaffolding called out quietly, not to anyone in particular, "Man knows his stuff." The other just watched, silent, the expression unreadable. Cameron said nothing. He just kept walking, eyes forward. The elevator groaned a little on the way up, still in its testing phase. The foreman stood beside Cameron, arms crossed, eyes on the floor numbers. No small talk. When the doors opened, a gust of warm air greeted them. The rooftop garden spread out in front of them, unfinished but already showing potential. Planters lined the perimeter, still waiting for their greenery. The wooden deck was in place, along with the irrigation system. The view of the city skyline was uninterrupted. "This was the heart of the pitch," Cameron said quietly, stepping onto the deck. "We called it a third place, not home, not work, a space for breath." The foreman didn't respond. He followed a few steps behind. Cameron moved to the edge, inspecting the drainage slope. It was off, subtle but enough to cause pooling. He noted it silently. He turned and crouched near the corner fixture, a custom-designed bench meant to integrate with the planter. The screws were mismatched. Someone had swapped them out. Sloppy. He jotted it down. "You really designed all this yourself?" the foreman asked finally. Cameron stood. "With a team. But the concept was mine." The foreman looked away toward the skyline. "Never seen a rooftop like this on a city library. That was the point." A long pause. Then, footsteps. A cluster of people appeared at the far end of the rooftop, having just stepped off another elevator. Suits, cameras, clipboards. Councilwoman Lee at the center, her aide just behind her, holding a binder. "There they are," the foreman muttered, almost with relief. Councilwoman Lee spotted Cameron first. She smiled and raised a hand. "Mr. Hayes," she called out. "There you are." Cameron nodded. The foreman turned to him, blinking. "You know her?" Cameron didn't answer. He just stepped forward, calm and quiet, as the councilwoman crossed the deck toward him. Toward the man none of them had expected to find already inspecting the rooftop. The man they'd all be listening to in just a few moments. Councilwoman Lee reached him quickly, her heels soft on the wooden deck. She extended her hand with an ease that suggested familiarity. "We weren't expecting you this early," she said warmly. "I wanted a look before the crowd," Cameron replied, shaking her hand. Behind her, two staffers whispered something to each other. A third, a young black woman, locked eyes with Cameron and offered a subtle nod. Recognition, respect. The foreman stepped back slightly, his posture uncertain now. His eyes flicked between Cameron and the councilwoman. "This is Mr. Cameron Hayes," Lee said to the group behind her. "The architect. None of this would be standing without him." Several heads turned. One of the assistants glanced down at their clipboard, almost embarrassed. A man in a gray suit adjusted his tie, eyes narrowing like he was recalibrating everything. The foreman cleared his throat. "Didn't realize you were. I thought you were." Cameron looked at him briefly. "I know what you thought." The words weren't sharp. They didn't need to be. Councilwoman Lee turned toward the view. "Let's begin the walkthrough here. Cameron, would you mind walking us through the rooftop design?" "Not at all." He stepped forward, gesturing toward the edge. "This is where the south slope was meant to carry water runoff toward the corner drain. But its pooling instead needs to be regraded. Also, someone swapped the hardware on the integrated seating." He spoke clearly, professionally, but without urgency. The room, if a rooftop could be called that, was quiet now, listening. Councilwoman Lee glanced back at the foreman. "We'll make a note," he mumbled. "You'll fix it," she corrected, her tone still polite, but with finality. The group began moving slowly behind Cameron, asking questions, taking notes. The man in the gray suit hung back slightly, watching him. The foreman stayed even further back, now silent. The assumptions were unraveling, one quiet correction at a time. They descended the staircase slowly, Cameron at the front, the group trailing behind. The foreman no longer led. He walked off to the side now, avoiding Cameron's gaze. Councilwoman Lee's team asked questions, more carefully now, about material choices, community impact, how design decisions were made. Cameron answered each one clearly. No over-explaining. No need to justify. When they reached the second floor again, Cameron paused in the south corridor. He pointed. This beam wasn't installed to spec. It breaks the clean line of the ceiling. It needs correcting. The gray-suited man finally spoke. You're sure it's not just aesthetic preference? Cameron looked at him. No. It's a structural alignment issue. And it compromises the visual rhythm. If we don't fix it, it'll read as careless. And people will feel that, even if they can't name it. The man said nothing. Just nodded. Councilwoman Lee's aide scribbled furiously in her notebook. They moved on. Cameron pointed out the seating area by the south windows, designed low to frame the view without blocking light. This was for students. Natural light helps with focus. Also makes them feel safe. He didn't say. Kids like him didn't always feel safe in city buildings. But the thought lived in the silence. They moved through the reading room. A few construction workers paused as they passed. Some nodded, now realizing who he was. Others looked away, uncertain. In a corner, two janitorial staff, one older man, one younger woman, stood near the supply door. The woman watched Cameron as he walked by. No smile, no wave, just a small tilt of her head. She knew. She'd seen men like him ignored in lobbies, followed in shops, doubted on blueprints. But not today. Today he was leading the tour. The group flowed into the children's reading area. Sunlight spilled across the floor, catching the soft angles of low bookshelves and the pastel murals on the wall. Cameron stood near the middle, letting them take it in. I designed this space with sight lines from every corner, he said. Parents can see their kids. Staff can too. But it still feels open, safe. Councilwoman Lee smiled. My daughter would live in here if she could. The man in the gray suit muttered. Didn't realize architects thought about that level of detail. Cameron didn't respond right away. He looked around the room. We do, he said finally. If we care enough. The gray suit didn't answer. A few of the aides glanced at each other. One of them, a Latino man in his 20s, whispered, they never expected him to be this guy. Another nodded. They expected a blazer, a clicker, maybe someone flown in from New York. Instead, they got someone who walked the site in dusty shoes with notes written by hand. The foreman remained in the back, arms crossed now, saying nothing. They finished the walkthrough in a quiet gallery space that opened onto the West Plaza. The group fanned out, murmuring to each other, some taking photos, others checking phones. Councilwoman Lee lingered near Cameron. You've done more than design a building, she said. You've reshaped how people will move through it, how they'll feel in it. Cameron looked out at the plaza. That's always the goal. She studied his face, as if seeing something she hadn't at first. I'm glad they'll know your name now, she said. Cameron's voice was soft. They won't all remember it, but they'll remember how it felt, she replied. Behind them, the foreman was still watching, still learning. The crowd thinned as Councilwoman Lee's team moved toward the exit, chatting in pairs, already shifting back into their schedules and meetings. The energy that had filled the tour began to dissipate, replaced by the low hum of construction sounds starting up again. Cameron remained in the gallery space, scribbling a final note in his book. The soft clatter of a hard hat against tile made him glance up. The foreman stood nearby. He didn't speak right away, just adjusted his tool belt, then looked down at his boots. I didn't know, he muttered. Cameron closed his notebook. You didn't ask. The foreman looked up, met his eyes for a second, then looked away. I've been in this business 30 years, he said. You get used to reading people. Thought I had you figured out. You didn't, Cameron said quietly. The foreman nodded. Yeah, I see that now. There was no anger in Cameron's voice, no gloating, just fact. I wasn't trying to disrespect you, the foreman added. Just didn't expect someone like you to be the lead. Cameron raised an eyebrow. Someone like me? The foreman winced, realizing. I didn't mean. I know what you meant. They stood there, in the stillness of a room not yet open to the public. I've walked into a lot of sites like this, Cameron said, and I've been mistaken for everything but the person who designed them. I'm used to it, But that doesn't make it okay. The foreman nodded again, slower this time. You're right. A pause. Anything else you need fixed besides what you already flagged? He asked, voice quieter now. Cameron considered for a moment. Yeah, the tone. The foreman blinked. The tone. In how you talk to people you don't expect to be important. He didn't say it cruelly. He didn't need to. Then he turned and walked toward the stairwell, leaving the foreman alone in the gallery, staring at the floor, and seeing something different than he had before. Cameron stepped back onto the second floor, the air cooler now as crews resumed their tasks. Paint buckets lined the corridor, and a soft buzz came from the rooftop team checking the irrigation fix. He walked slowly, taking in the details others missed. The minor misalignments, the clean welds, the little things that revealed whether people cared. At the far end of the hallway, a young woman in a maintenance uniform crouched beside a mop bucket. She glanced up as he passed. You're the architect, right? Cameron paused. Yeah. She smiled. Figured. Nobody else walks this place like they built it. He nodded, not sure what to say. But something in her eyes, respect without ceremony, landed deeper than most praise. Looks good, she added. Feels solid. Safe. Thanks, Cameron said. She turned back to her bucket and he kept walking. He passed two men from the HVAC crew near the stairwell. One of them nodded, hesitant. Hey, he said. Sorry about earlier. Cameron didn't stop, just glanced over and said, just do the job right. The man nodded, almost relieved. At the stairwell landing, Cameron stopped, looked back down the corridor. The workers, the light, the slow shift in posture from those who'd seen who he really was. It wasn't dramatic, but it was starting. Not because he'd demanded it, but because he hadn't flinched. Back in the main entrance, the lobby was nearly empty. The councilwoman's group had left. The cameras, the note-taking, the polite praise, it had all moved on. Cameron remained. He stepped behind the check-in desk, not to intrude, but to inspect the built-in power panel he'd requested for accessibility. It was installed correctly. For once, as he stood, the younger of the two security guards, the one who'd said nothing that morning, walked over, slower this time. Sir, he said quietly. Cameron looked up. I didn't say anything before, the guard said, rubbing the back of his neck. When my partner stopped you, I just stood there. Cameron didn't answer right away, just waited. I figured you'd handle it, and you did. Better than I would have, probably. Still, Cameron waited. I guess I'm saying, I should have said something. I saw it was wrong. Now Cameron spoke, voice calm. Then why didn't you? The guard looked away. Didn't want to make it worse. Cameron studied him. Worse for who? The question landed heavier than it sounded. The guard opened his mouth, closed it, then just nodded. Right? Cameron nodded once in return. It's not about calling people out. It's about stepping in. Even just a little. The guard's voice was low. I'll remember that. Cameron stepped back toward the doors. That's the point. Outside, the city moved on like nothing happened. But inside, a handful of people were left thinking a little differently. Some out of guilt, others out of respect. Either way, it was a start. Later that afternoon, Cameron returned to the site alone. The workers were gone for the day. The building was quiet, just the low hum of cooling systems and the occasional creak of settling walls. He walked the perimeter of the lobby, then stood beneath the dedication wall, still unfinished. A sheet of protective plastic covered the marble slab, but the engraving beneath was visible in faint outline. He stepped closer, peeled back the edge of the plastic. Baltimore Central Library designed by Cameron Hayes, AIA. No title, no corporate name, just his. He stared at it for a long time. He hadn't asked for that. The councilwoman had insisted. He thought about all the buildings he'd helped design that bore no mention of him. Projects where he had done most of the work only to be listed as a consultant. The meetings where his voice wasn't the one clients turned to. Where he was seen but not quite seen. But here now his name was etched in stone. Permanent, visible, unmistakable. He let the plastic fall back into place and stepped away, the sound of his shoes echoing softly in the empty space. This wasn't pride. It was something quieter. Like proof. Not for them. For himself. As Cameron exited the building, the sun was beginning to dip behind the skyline, casting long shadows across the plaza. The city moved at its usual pace, cars inching through intersections, distant sirens, the rhythm of normal. He sat on a bench just outside the library, the one facing the west wall where the children's mural would soon go. He watched people pass without noticing him. Two teenagers walked by, glanced at the building, then at him. "That the new library?" one asked. "Yeah," the other said. "Looks dope." They didn't stop, just kept moving. But they'd noticed. A father trailed behind with a stroller, pausing near the front steps. He didn't go in, just looked at the facade, maybe imagining the future. Story time. Quiet moments. Cameron didn't say anything. Didn't need to. The building was speaking now. A few steps away, a maintenance worker from earlier came around the corner, smoking a cigarette. She spotted Cameron and gave a nod. "Didn't know architects sat outside their own buildings," she said. He shrugged. "Sometimes you want to see how it settles into the world." She took a drag, then looked at the glass, the wood, the steel. "You built this," she said. He corrected her gently. "Designed it. A lot of people built it." "Still," she said, "it's yours." Then she walked off. He sat there a little longer, letting the words settle. Not in his ego, but in his bones. That evening, Cameron's phone buzzed 3 times in a row before he finally answered. It was Miriam, his project manager, calling from her office across town. "You went out there today," she said, no question in her voice. "I did. I figured. Councilwoman Lee's aide sent over photos. Said you handled the walkthrough solo. That wasn't the plan." "I know," Cameron replied. There was a pause. "You all right?" "I'm fine." Another pause. "Anything happen?" Cameron exhaled softly. "Nothing I haven't seen before." On the other end, she didn't speak. But she didn't hang up either. "I had to remind a few people what I look like when I'm not in a presentation," he added. "That's all. They listen." Eventually, Miriam was quiet for a long moment. Then, "They shouldn't have to see a badge or hear a title to treat you right. They usually do." He heard her sigh. "You want me to write it up?" she asked. "Formal complaint, statement, whatever helps." "No. You sure?" "I don't want this becoming about one person messing up," Cameron said. "It's about how easy it is for people to assume who matters." She was quiet again. "All right," she said eventually. I hate that you have to carry this stuff quietly." "I don't carry it for them," he said. "I carry it for what comes next." Miriam didn't reply, but he knew she understood. She always had. 2 weeks later, the library opened to the public. No ribbon cutting. No press conference. Just unlocked doors and a quiet welcome sign printed on cream-colored cardstock. Cameron visited that afternoon. Alone. He didn't introduce himself. Didn't speak to staff. Just walked the floors, watching. The reading room buzzed softly. Students leaned over books. Elderly patrons scrolled through touchscreens at the catalog kiosks. A young mother sat cross-legged in the children's area, while her toddler flipped through a picture book with torn corners. No one noticed him. That was the goal. He passed by a group gathered near the West Plaza. Teens from a local school sketching the building's angles. One of them pointed up at the rooftop line. "See that shadow line?" she said. "That's on purpose." Another student squinted. "How you know?" "My cousin's in architecture school." She said, "This guy, Cameron something, he made it like that." Cameron paused just out of earshot. Didn't move. Didn't smile. Just listened. They didn't know who he was, but they knew what he'd done. That was enough. He turned and made his way back toward the exit. The building would hold now. The people inside would give it meaning. And no one needed to know who had made the light fall just right across the floor to feel it. As Cameron stepped outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the front steps. He paused at the edge of the plaza, turned, and looked back one last time. The glass reflected the sky. The structure stood balanced, confident, not loud, not showy, just present. A man in a suit held the door open for an older woman with a cane. A group of kids darted across the entrance, laughing, a librarian calling after them with a smile. Somewhere behind the glass, someone was reading in a chair he had designed. None of them would know about the guard who doubted him, or the foreman who almost sent him away. They wouldn't hear the hesitation in the voices that once questioned whether someone like him could design something like this. And that was fine. They weren't supposed to carry that weight. He had. Quietly, deliberately, without spectacle. He took one slow breath, then turned down the sidewalk and walked away, blending into the street like any other passerby. Behind him, the library remained, bright, solid, open. A building that would outlive the assumptions it had been born through. And every time someone stepped inside and felt welcome without knowing why, that would be the part of him they never forgot.